SRC, commissioners here, members of the media, all protocols observed, welcome, and let us pray so we go straight to the agenda of the day. Shall we pray? We thank you, Father, for this day, and we want to thank you for the presence that's before us, O God. We pray that your presence will be with us as we deliberate and as we take very crucial information to Kenyans. May this be for the good of this country. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Without further ado, just to introduce the panel at the front. My name is Anthony Mwangi with the SRC. All protocols observed. We have the CS, National Treasury, Professor Ndungu Njuguna, Chairperson SRC, Lynn Mengich, PS, Chris Kipto, PS National Treasury. On the SRC side also we have the Vice Chairperson, Dr. Mani Komora. We also have Commissioner Dr. Leah Mumbua, SRC, at the extreme end, also with SRC, but also an alternate member to SRC from the National Treasury. We have Francis Anyona. So that's a panel today. Without further ado, we will kindly request Chairperson Lynn Mengich to come and deliver the message that has brought us here today. Thank you very much.
The CS National Treasury, the PS National Treasury, my fellow colleague commissioners, my fellow colleagues SRC, distinguished guests from the media, good morning. So we are here today just to talk about one item, which is the remuneration and benefits for state and other public officers for the period 2023-24 and 2024-25. So allow me, as I begin, to just state the mandate of the Commission, because the remuneration and benefit is set based on the mandate of the national and county governments on remuneration and benefits for other public officers. While setting and advising on remuneration and benefits payable in the public service, SRC is guided by principles set out in Article 230, Sub-Article 5 of the Constitution and Section 12 of the SRC Act 2011. These constitutional principles are the need to ensure that the total compensation is fiscally sustainable, the need to ensure that the public service can attract and retain the skills required to execute their functions, the need to recognize performance and productivity, and transparency and fairness. The fifth principle from the SRC Act is equal remuneration to persons for work of equal value as required in Section 12 of the SRC Act 2011. Ladies and gentlemen, with that context, allow me now to talk through the rationales for the current remuneration review cycle. Broadly, and we look at the overarching rationale, is that the review is about harmonization to achieve equity and fairness in remuneration and benefits in the public service within the principle of affordability and fiscal sustainability. With that broad overarching rationale, I will now run you through the key rationales for this review. And these are: 1, pursuant to Section 11E of SRC Act, SRC set a 4-year review cycle for remuneration and benefits in the public service, with the first cycle running for the period 2013-2014 to 2016-2017, and the second cycle for the period 2017-2018 to 2020-2021. The third remuneration and benefit review cycle covers the financial year 2021-22 to 24-25. Due to economic conditions occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic, SRC, in consultation with the National Treasury, froze the salary structures for the first 2 years of the third cycle, that is 2021-22 to 2022-2023. In 2022, the economy sustained the growth momentum that started in 2021 after the recovery from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Hence, a review for the third and fourth year of the review cycle. The second rationale is on attraction and retention of requisite skills. SRC undertook an international labor market survey for state officers and local labor market surveys for other public officers to determine the positioning of gross remuneration structure for public institutions. This was to inform the development of remuneration structures that align to market trends so as to ensure attraction and retention of requisite skills. The surveys revealed that gross salaries for some public service institutions are below the target 50th percentile, while others are above. Just to give you a quick summary is that state officers are at 45th percentile, state corporations are above at 89th percentile, civil service in both national and county governments are below, they are at 39th percentile, teaching service is below at 36th percentile, public universities are close to the target, they are at 49th percentile, other public officers, which includes constitutional commissions, that's the secretariat staff, are above at 84th percentile. These figures demonstrate that there are state corporations, there are public service institutions that are below the 50th percentile, some are above. And therefore, as a result of that, this review seeks therefore to adjust remuneration and benefit structures that are below the target market positioning of the 50th percentile to ensure attraction and retention of requisite skills to the extent of affordability and fiscal sustainability. It therefore hence will retain the salary structures for institutions that are already at 50th and above. The third rationale is on equity and fairness. Due to historical reasons, the public service has disparate remuneration and benefit structures. The different market positioning ranging from 36th percentile to 89th percentile as earlier remunerated are actually a demonstration of the disparities that we have in the remuneration structures. And therefore, this review seeks to adjust salary structures that are below 50th percentile so as to achieve equity and fairness through harmonization to the extent of affordability and fiscal sustainability. Further, SRC undertook job evaluation to determine the relative worth of jobs to ensure equal remuneration to persons for work of equal value. This review takes into account the implementation of job evaluation grading results and the resultant salary structures to achieve equity and fairness to the extent of affordability and fiscal sustainability. Fourth is cost of living adjustment. The review cushions against loss of purchasing power arising from the erosion in the real value of remuneration and benefits to the extent of affordability and fiscal sustainability. 5 is legal compliance. The review ensures compliance with the statutory minimum wage. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me now to speak about the salient features of the third remuneration review cycle. And these are: 1, the review covers the entire public service, both state and other public officers, within the extent of affordability and fiscal sustainability, read together with the other 4 principles. Number 2, the average increase is 7 to 10% over a 2-year period, inclusive of the existing notch increase, which averages 3% annually. 3, progressive harmonization of remuneration structures to achieve equity and fairness, thus adjustment of remuneration structures that are below the 50th percentile market positioning, while freezing salary structures that are above the 50th percentile. 4, where the salary structures are retained or frozen, the notch increase will continue as budgeted up to 2023-24 is 1st July 2023. So let me now speak about the implications of the review on the wage bill, starting with the budget implications. So pursuant to the constitutional principle of affordability and fiscal sustainability, SRC engaged the National Treasury on funding. The National Treasury advised SRC to consider reviewing remuneration structures within a budget allocation of 21.7 billion for the year 2023-2024, which is distributed as follows, and I will quickly run you through how it is distributed. So the executive in the state officers in the executive will be allocated 126 million, which is 0.6% of the total allocation. Parliament state officers is 78 million, which is 0.4% of the total allocation. Judiciary state officers is 305 million, which is 1.4% of the allocation. County state officers is 408 million, which is 1.9%. Teaching service is 9.5 billion, which is 44.2% of the total allocation. The civil service is 1.8 billion, which is 8.5%. The county government is 4 billion, which is 18.8%. Uniformed and disciplined forces, 4.5 billion, which is 20.9%. And other public officers, 745 million, which is 3.4%. So that is the budget allocation, which we shall provide you with those numbers later, and you will see the details. The other implication on the wage bill is the current wage bill ratios. Where does this take us to once we implement this budget allocation of 21? And I will just talk through very few numbers. You will see later in the press release that we shall give you, you'll be able to interrogate the numbers. But what I would like to point out is just a few of these. The first one is compensation to employees, which is the total wage bill. Is currently around 987 billion, and it will now go to 1 trillion in 2021-22. You will see the figures later. So it has been rising, but one of the reasons for that increase is the number of employees. Again, you will see the figures that it has been growing, and we are now close to 1 million, to be projected to 968 million in 2023-24. 968,000, so it's just about a million. Now, let me speak about the implication in terms of the ratios that we normally track. The first one is we normally look at the wage bill to GDP, and we also look at the wage bill to revenue. The wage bill to revenue, there is a target in the Public Finance Management Act which stipulates that not more than 35% of the revenue is to be spent on the wage bill. And in terms of ratio to GDP, we use an average for developing countries, which is at 7.5%. On those two important ratios, on the ratio to GDP, we are actually at 7.74, which is very close to target. That is projected to 7.58 and projected in 2023, which is this financial year, to 7.19. So it means we are actually on target compared to developing countries. We will be within the average for developing countries. In terms of wage bill to revenue, and this is ordinary revenue, we are currently at 47.06, so it's about 47%. In 2022 is projected to 43.5% and is further projected to 40.45%, meaning that it's showing a trajectory towards the 35%. So the message here is that when we look at the wage bill in absolute terms, which you will see in the numbers, it will continue to grow in absolute terms. And the reason for that growth is largely because as a developing country, we shall continue to recruit in key sectors, that is health, teaching, and security. Indeed, as a country, we are yet to achieve the desired ratios for teacher to student, or healthcare to population ratio, or security to population ratio. So those are the areas that we will continue to recruit, and therefore in absolute terms, the wage bill will grow. However, what we must therefore continuously watch is that ratio to revenue and to GDP. So how then do we move to the desired ratio of 35%? Because for the GDP ratio, we can see that we are pretty much where we should be based on the projections, but on the ratio to wage bill, we are still behind, but with a very good trajectory towards the 35. So there are three broad strategies to bring the wage bill ratio to the target stipulated in the Public Finance Management Act 2012 and Regulation 2015, and within the ratio to developing countries. These are, one, the GDP and revenue growth outpacing wage bill. And you will also see that in the numbers that we shall share, that indeed the wage bill growth has been lagging GDP growth, and it is also lagging revenue growth. So that's a very good trajectory, that wage bill is growing at a lower pace than the GDP and revenue. And therefore, as we continue that trajectory, and I'm sure the National Treasury will speak more about that, the second broad strategy is about reviewing, setting, and advising on remuneration and benefits within the principle of fiscal sustainability. And the Commission continues to do that, and I'll share a few numbers shortly to demonstrate that. And the third strategy is increased public service productivity. So the ratio of wage bill to GDP has declined from 8.4% in financial year 2017-18 to 7.53 and projected to continue reducing. It is projected to 7.9, as I alluded to it earlier, so against a target of 7.5 for developing countries. As a ratio of revenue, it has declined from 51.54%, and it is projected to 40.45 in 2023-24, against a target of 35%. Further, in the last 2 years, the revenue grew on average by 18.5%, while the wage bill grew on average by 5.6%. So the growth in the average monthly salary per employee was 2.3%. So increase in employee numbers, as I alluded to earlier, will continue to increase in the key sectors, but our concern is the ratio of that absolute amount to revenue. So in terms of the third strategy, in reviewing, setting and advising on remuneration and benefit, the Commission continuously focuses on fiscal sustainability along with the other principles. In doing this, as an example, SRC continues to check public service wage bill, as demonstrated in a few numbers which I'll share with you shortly, that on an ongoing basis the Commission we receive requests from public institutions for review of many areas of the remuneration. Could be salaries through collective bargaining negotiations. It's also allowances, and on an ongoing basis we receive those requests. We analyze it against the principles that I mentioned earlier, and based on that we then continuously track what does that mean for the Commission. For example, in 2020-21, we received requests of, the value of the request was 70 billion. 70 billion is the request that we received. Most of these were collective bargaining negotiations, but we also have allowances within that. The Commission reviewed those allowances and only approved 5.9 out of the 70 billion. So it means on that year, the approval was just 8% was approved. In 2021-22, the Commission received requests worth 20.5 billion and only approved 2.6, which is 13%. In 2022-23, we received requests of 8 billion and only approved 4.2, which is about 52%. So in total, just for those 3 years, the Commission received requests worth 98.8 billion and only approved 12.9 billion. So that goes to demonstrate how the Commission is continuously ensuring that the wage bill is not outpacing the revenue of GDP growth by continuously applying the principle of fiscal sustainability. The third strategy which I talked about is labor productivity. Kenya's labor productivity remains low compared to other countries. According to the International Labour Organization 2021 statistics on labor productivity, Kenya is ranked at number 151 out of 185 countries globally, and number 2 in Africa is 22 out of 46 countries. Improved labor productivity drives economic growth, which results in higher revenue and in turn improved wage bill to revenue ratio. A collaborative effort is required in public service to drive productivity as a key enabler towards achieving the wage bill to revenue ratio of 35%. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me now to speak about the final part of our review, which is addressing allowances for state and public officers. In 2021, SRC commenced a process of streamlining allowances to achieve transparency, accountability, equity and fairness in remuneration, and to ensure affordability and fiscal sustainability of the wage bill in the public service. In phase 1, which was implemented in the last financial year, 3 allowances ceased to be payable. These are plenary sitting allowances, ministerial allowance, which resulted in an annual total cost saving of 1.7 billion, and taxable car allowance, resulting in a cost saving of 9.7 billion over a 4-year period. SRC has now completed phase 2, in which 4 allowances have been reviewed, set, and or advised as follows. Retreat allowance. Payment of retreat allowance in addition to the basic salary amounts to double compensation and consequently ceases to be payable. Sitting allowance for institutional committees. Payment of sitting allowance for institutional internal committees in addition to the basic salary amounts to double compensation and consequently ceases to be payable. Number 3, task force allowance for institutional internal committees. So payment of this allowance in addition to the basic salary amounts to double compensation and consequently ceases to be payable. The 4th one is daily subsistence allowance. This allowance, the daily subsistence allowance for local travel has been standardized across the country for the respective grades. The prevailing rates for cities will apply. The DSA for foreign travel remains unchanged, save for correction of a few countries. Detailed communication has been made to all public service institutions on these 4 allowances. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, this review is about harmonization to achieve equity and fairness in remuneration and benefits in the public service within the principle of fiscal sustainability. The increase maintains the trajectory towards achieving the wage bill to revenue ratio of 35%. Although the trajectory is positive, a lot more needs to be done, especially in the area of productivity. Public service productivity is a transformation agenda that will enable government drive and align the entire public service towards economic growth, high and sustained revenue growth, which will reduce the wage bill to revenue ratio, improve service delivery, competitiveness, and employment creation. SRC continues to urge all public service institutions to improve on productivity and together deliver the country's agenda for the benefits of its citizens. Thank you, and may God bless you. I will now invite the PS National Treasury to make his remarks, and thereafter invite the CS.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, CEO of SRC, board members and staff, and members of the media. Good morning. I'm Jambo. Assalamu alaikum. I'm not going to dwell on the subject matter for today because CS is going to speak about it. But because I have the media present here, let me take a few minutes to give some updates from the National Treasury. Let me indicate that I think today is 1 year since we went through the general elections. 9th August, today, so we are exactly 1 year old. It took a while for this government to be formed. CS has been in office for about 10 months, I think myself about 7 months. And we have had an environment of uncertainty, many shocks. You know, every general election has its own uncertainty. Then we had the lagged effects of COVID-19, and then effects of Ukraine-Russia war, and domestically climate shocks. In that environment, it has been a bit difficult, but I have some good news to report that we closed the financial year, fiscal year 2022-23 on a very positive note, having collected and disbursed a total of 3.24 trillion shillings out of the revised estimate of 3.62 trillion. So that's an overall performance of 90%. And it means we didn't collect only 380 billion of the target, despite that difficult environment. And of that collection that we made, we did the following. We disbursed 100% of equitable share to counties, amounting to 400 billion. That also included arrears of 1 month of 30 billion that were incurred in July because it was not paid in the previous year. And so we paid 100%, including lagged 1 month for the year. We disbursed also the entire amount of allocation for National Government Constituent Development Fund, that's CDF, of 47.2 billion. We funded all arrears for cash transfers to orphans, vulnerable children, totaling 16 billion. And we have a directive from His Excellency President that this will have to be paid together with salaries or even earlier than salaries. We have started the month of July. And we have done well in fully paying our debt service. We are on course and we have not defaulted. We don't intend to default. And this month of July, we even paid heavily on external payments, including a major loan of about 63 billion to Exim Bank of China. Given the challenges of mobilization, we had an unfunded amount of about 77 billion that forms pending bills, which CS has given directive that it becomes first charge of every accounting officer. And all MDS have been directed to prioritize payment of pending bills because this government is not going to tolerate accumulation of pending bills. No accounting officer will be allowed to incur new commitments without clearing existing pending bills. And next week, CS will be gazetting a pending bills committee to look at the historical pending bills. And I think I got an SMS from the clerk of the National Assembly who told me, and I think he sent to CS, that we closed the year 2023-2024 having settled most bills, including members' constituency items and mileage claims, which is unprecedented. He also went ahead to say that National Assembly closed the year with the least amount of pending bills in the last 9 years. And finally, I want to talk about pension payments. We have continued as a government to uphold commitment to welfare of our public service employees, retirees, and pensioners. And the year that just ended, we've successfully met our commitments to the Public Service Superannuation Scheme, the PSS. We remitted employers' portion of contributions, and this reinforced sustainability and stability of the crucial pension system that was launched on January 2021. While members of the scheme contributed 11 billion, the government contributed 26 billion. Moreover, the government has demonstrated its unwavering commitment by disbursing an amount of 51.6 billion under the all-defined pension scheme towards lump sum payments of pensions. Additionally, the government has diligently maintained the timeliness of monthly pension disbursements to the 328,879 pensioners currently enrolled in the pension payroll. As of 31st July this year, all monthly pension payments have been distributed promptly. Notably, the government has disbursed an amount of 65.51 billion for monthly pensions during the fiscal year 22-23. This demonstrates our resolve to provide financial relief to pensioners who have dedicated their careers to public service. We understand the significance of these payments in maintaining the dignity and livelihood of our retired public servants. Furthermore, effective July this year, the government has implemented a biannual 3% increase to the pensions paid. This enhancement reinforces our commitment to enhancing the well-being of our esteemed pensioners in the face of evolving economic circumstances. Finally, I want to say that in the current financial year, the National Treasury will re-engineer the pension payment system by implementing an end-to-end enterprise resource planning solution that will fully automate the entire pension payment process as part of the broader government digitization transformation agenda. This development is expected to transform the public service pension ecosystem with a view of drastically reducing the turnaround time for settling pension claims for retired public servants while enhancing pensioners' customer experience. With those few remarks, I think you can allow me now to invite my Cabinet Secretary, Professor Njuguna Ndung'u. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, PS Dr. Chris Kipto. Thank you very much, my dear sister. Megich, we are always in constant communication. I think, Chris, you forgot to tell these people that there is one Senate committee we went to, and they told us that for the last 7 years, the government has never closed the fiscal year without arrears. We did not have any arrears, whether to county governments, whether to transfers to old people and disadvantaged people, or even the CDF for the last 7 years. We are singing praises to ourselves because everybody complained that you close the year with arrears so that even salaries at the county level are actually getting late. But of course, the media did not pick it up. Maybe we are saying it so that you can also pick it up. Not because we want you to give us hongera, we just want you to understand the reality. Most of us always run away from reality, especially when it doesn't suit you. You know, I still recall the other day I was giving people an example that Soyinka writes very complicated literature, isn't it? Soyinka, he got this. The only African who first got the Nobel Prize in Literature. And he says that a compost heap has got its own uses as long as the wind is flowing in a different direction. Very technical, but you know, he's very good in his work. Let me say that I'm very happy to be invited here, and I'm very happy that I listened to Megich when she gave the analysis. And of course, these are the areas that we have agreed on. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. How is everybody? Thank you. But let me start by saying that when you have a robust and performing economy, then it means that you have no problems in terms of trying to adjust wages and payment systems to realign the reward structure. For me, I like calling it the reward structure. To align that reward structure with economic realities. But if you fail to understand economic realities, then you cannot realign it. So these realities are reflected by the quality and structure of growth. Everybody will tell you, and that's where we start from, we say the growth of the economy, the vibrancy of the economy is this way. Why do we say that? Because you generate tax revenue from economic activity. If the economic activity is low, then you're not going to generate any economic revenue. You know, when I listened to Lynn here, Megich, she was even saying that the salary structure is 7.4% of GDP. But actually, what she should be saying, it is actually slightly over 50% of tax revenue, because that's where we pay the salaries, and the wage structure is based on tax revenue. Currently, we are actually generating 15.8%. That's our target. 15.8% of GDP is actually, that is what the tax effort or tax revenue is, or tax to GDP. So we are actually saying out of that, we are getting 7.4%, isn't it? So you can imagine why we have to push the denominator to be better. That is the GDP, the economic activity. So bear with us when we always have to refer to the economic activities. And that is the structure, and the quality and structure of growth is very, very important for us. This has been the case, especially in our economy. And in the last 4 years, and especially since the COVID-19, the economy slumped. In fact, the data that we have shows that the economy slumped to negative 0.27% in terms of growth. So you can imagine then it becomes quite like a whole issue of a very severe recession. And for us, we have to understand than what that recession does. In 2021, for example, even after all these effects, the economy rebounded to 7.57% on account of weak economic base that was there in 2021. And of course, thereafter, the economy has stabilized, and we can see some growth of 4.8% in 2021. But you have to relate that 4.8% in terms of what can it relate to? How can we actually look back in terms of the kind of demands or this kind of aspirations that we have? And since then, the economy is slowly being projected to grow at 6.7%, especially in this current fiscal year of 2023-2024. But that growth, we should also ask ourselves, is it spread across all the sectors of the economy, starting with the sectors that have been targeted by bottom-up economic transformation agenda? And those sectors that have been targeted by the bottom-up economic transformation agenda are those sectors that we believe are going to provide a very large impact to the rest of the economy, create a momentum for growth, but more importantly, will affect a majority of the people. Most of the time, I don't like us forgetting what bottom-up economic transformation agenda is, because if you forget, you'll forget the sector you are in. The other thing is that it's an agenda. Some of you associate me with economic framework morals, and let me say I cherish in that because it gives us structure. But this agenda is to try to acknowledge that something has gone wrong in the last 60 years. Bottom up, because the majority of the people have been left behind and they've gone to the bottom of the pyramid. In some cases, you show that they have actually gone into abject poverty. Early last year, I was doing some work on poverty, growth, poverty, inequality, and redistribution in African countries. And in my area life, that is, and that is now has just been published. That's why I like talking about. I would like to talk about it. The last time I talked to the media, I was talking about debt and growing with debt because it has just been published. The conclusion we come up with is that strong growth is going to be very, very important to reduce poverty. But when it is supplemented by targeted social protection programs, it will flatten inequality in the long run. That conclusion says that we need to look for not anymore about pro-poor growth. Pro-poor growth strategy. It is pro-growth poverty reduction strategy. What it tells us in our current discussion here now is that growth is going to be very, very important. And because we have targeted social protection programs, and during the COVID, we even structured some very active and very, very efficient targeted social transfer programs, especially during the lockdown, which worked very well. We know that we can move in that trajectory. So we do believe that the bottom-up economic transformation agenda is on course just because of the realities that we have seen. Those realities is that if we don't grow the economy, then we cannot have economic transformation. We cannot lift those at the bottom of the pyramid if we do not look at the sectors that benefit them more and actually create a momentum for future growth and future potential for growth. And it is an agenda trying to say the quality and structure of growth becomes quite problematic. The first time when I analyzed growth, I even told myself that the growth that you see in the last 7 years has been driven by public sector investments in heavy infrastructure projects, which is good in the first phase, so that the second phase, private sector takes it up. But public sector growth does not make contribution to tax revenue, isn't it? So you find yourself with a very high rate of growth, but because that structure is actually more pushing, is the public sector which is driving it, then you have less and less tax revenue because it's not a tax-paying sector. In fact, when we argued with the county government, I even went further to decompose that growth in terms of revenue contribution. Some work that I had done for the government in the 1990s at a TIPLA. And we realized that actually the public sector was contributing about 19% of that growth, 7 point something that time, the one I've just seen. But it was actually making just 1% contribution in tax revenue. So you can imagine the mismatch. Here we are, what Megich is presenting is that you have to grow the tax revenue for her to allocate it to salaries, isn't it? And the reward structure. But if the public sector is only contributing 1%, but driving growth by 19%, so you can see the mismatch. So the statement that I'm making that the structure and quality of growth is very, very important. So I wanted to spend more time on beta because it's not a theoretical construct. The theoretical construct that we had in import substitution in the 50s and in the 60s, and then export-led growth that had a structure in itself, are structures or like models that we thought had worked in other countries, but they never worked for ourselves. That is why we don't need a model, we need an agenda. Before I leave the subject of poverty, growth and poverty, I was looking at various countries, like, for example, why economic transformation is important. One of them, and why we have seen why it is important, is because we have to grow the economy because we want to grow the savings. Yesterday, the president was telling some people in Sagana Road that our savings to GDP is about 8%. That's why we have to borrow, because the savings gap is very huge. If you look at countries like China, all these East Asian tigers that we wanted to replicate with the export-led growth, their savings are range between 40 and 60%. But how do we grow our savings? We have to grow our savings purely, first of all, because we need interventions. The other thing is that we also have to have vibrant economies because it allows you to target those savings into investments that are going to give you higher returns. We can talk more about this, but it's very, very critical that 8% is really a pathetic figure. Those countries that have transformed themselves, and we have examples, China in the last 40 years, India in the last 20, 25 years. Those countries had the most poor and impoverished people in the world. Look at them now. Today, we are looking at Africa. And most of the poor and impoverished people are in Africa, in some countries. I don't want to mention them in the press conference. We usually do that in our own circuits of researchers, but I'm almost getting out of that circuit, so I can talk the reality. Let me come back to our function today. And what I want to recognize is that in Kenya, remuneration and benefits, or the word structure, and the benefits that go with it, are reviewed and perhaps even affected every 4 years by the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, SRC. Most people don't like SRC because we like it when it is doing something positive. So today somebody will have you, Megij. But when they ask for salary or even benefits adjustment and you don't get an answer, they don't like it. But I think they are doing a good job because one of them is to reflect on the realities that we face. So that's why it is. It covers every 4 years, and the last review covered the period 2017 and to 2018 fiscal year to 2020-2021. The review should be aligned to the MTEF cycle, which is a 3-year rolling plan, and the additional year allows us for preparations so that we can see the results of that planning cycle. And this is consistent with logic. We need, okay, we had a 3-year planning cycle. What were the results? We need also to have 1 year to understand whether we managed to achieve what we had targeted. The last 2 reviews were undertaken in consultation with the National Treasury to always ascertain the affordability and sustainability of the reviews. Because you can conduct a review, but there are no resources. The reality must come. The reality must hit you. You know, I say this because most of us have households, isn't it? The reality starts even from the household. So the government is also just like a household. The government is an agent just like a household. The process of the third cycle of the remuneration review, which runs from 2021-22 fiscal year to 2024-25, is not any different. From the inception of the current review cycle, there have been consultations between the SRC and the National Treasury, and due to the performance of the economy, the National Treasury advised SRC that due to poor performance of the economy, which in a sense is saying that we generated less and less revenue, and especially in the last 2 years, then salary structure review should be frozen for those 2 years to allow for the economy to improve before we can actually effect any steps, positive steps. The agreement between the 2 institutions was that at the end of the first 2 years, there would be a review based on the economic indicators of the national economy to ascertain whether a review would be feasible and affordable. The SRC advised the public service on a salary structure freeze for the period of 2021-22 to 2022-23, and after 2 years that have lapsed, SRC re-engaged with the National Treasury on funding for the review of the 2023-2024 fiscal year that will run up to 2024 to 2025. The National Treasury considered and made budgetary provisions at the 2023-24 budget to the tune of 21.7 billion. A similar amount has been projected for the financial year 2024-2025. This is a 2.1% increase on the current wage bill that stands at 1.10 trillion. Madam Megich actually put it in terms of the GDP, isn't it? Which starts by telling us then what happens when the GDP doesn't grow. Which tells us when you have negative shocks that are either exogenous or endogenous, then you know you're not growing the economic activity, and then you're going to have massive problems. The National Treasury appreciates the fact that this is not what SRC would have required, but they have considered the slow economic recovery of the economy and the economic structure. They have looked at the structure and quality of growth, and they have listened to the National Treasury. And so the National Treasury has requested SRC to review what we can do within the available budget and how we can distribute it. And that's why she took a bit of time to go through the distribution. I'm sure you question that distribution, but it has its own logic and it has its own way of doing that. For us, we wanted to have a board figure. But for you, the most important point to make, to take, is to know that the 21.7 billion is adding to the wage bill. So the whole issue is, can you afford it? Can the National Treasury afford it? You are adding to the total wage bill. And that is something that you should carry in mind. It is not something, and it's going to be, as soon as you put it now, it's going to be there in perpetuity, isn't it? There's no time you will come and say, please remove the 21.7 billion. Now that, no, it will be there for a long time, so we have to continue budgeting it. And we are budgeting that for this year, and a similar amount for the next year, because we are conscious that we have to come down to the realities that The public sector workers are suffering just because of the shocks that have hit the economy. Some of those shocks were supply related, and supply related shocks have also their scarcity value that raises domestic prices and tend to raise relative prices even faster, because scarcity value then boils down to reallocation of resources. Of course, I do believe that a proper remuneration and benefits review that can ideally cover the loss of purchasing power of income, and everybody has been in that subject matter, should be much higher than 2.1%. But however, we are considering the circumstances that face us. We are considering that the National Treasury what it can do for now, and what it can actually then say, if we are doing this, let us put ourselves into that structure and grow the economy. And that is the base that all of us will be watching. So the provision, therefore, is largely to address harmonization of issues of public service delivery structure that is going to improve service delivery and become more efficient. I'm sure some of you will be asking, even with those small increases, can the country afford at this time? But there are not very many who ask those questions. There are very many who believe that the government should afford anyway, but I think that is not the reality. The reality is it may not afford. We are all struggling with economic recovery. We are trying to push the economic recovery in different interventions. And you've seen some results are showing up, but some others are going to take a long time because there are a lot of measures and policy designs and interventions that are required to bring down the cost of living. I always used to argue many years ago that a policy shift, a policy proposition takes a bit of time to navigate or reverberate through the economy to give you the results you want. So it's something that we want to wait for some time. So the whole issue is, can the country afford? But I would like to assure you that the economy is on the positive trajectory. The kind of framework of policies and targeted interventions that we have taken is to show that we want to make sure that the economy recovers, and recovers very strongly, starting with sectors that we believe are going to provide us with that impact, the initial impact, but after that, the momentum for growth. And these measures have been put in place and are expected to spur the economic growth, leading to increased revenues across. And then it means that once there is vibrancy in the economy, then it means that the revenues will increase. The bottom-up economic transformation agenda recognizes that this has targeted, or it can cover some sectors in the initial phase, which have the largest impact in the economy. And once if they have the largest impact, then they are going to generate more tax revenues, and we can grow the economy. Government depends on tax revenues to grow the economy. When there are gaps in that revenue, that's when government has to borrow. Borrowing is actually to close the gap. Borrowing shows the inadequacies of the available resources. So in a sense, the anticipated performance to support those expenditures is actually dependent very much on how the revenues, economic vibrancy, is going to generate revenues. Don't forget, as my PS, Dr. Chris Kipto said, when we incur debt, we have to pay that debt. So in a sense, we have to make sure that we direct the debt that we incur into productive areas so that it can give us returns, to give us the future capacity to service that debt. You cannot fail to pay your debt in Kenyan Constitution. That's why the first charge is actually to pay debt. You cannot fail to pay debt. You cannot default in debt or on debt in Kenya. It is a constitutional issue. And so that's why we have to make sure that once we borrow, we have directed that particular debt into areas that can help us grow the economy so that those returns on the growth can help us pay the debt. We have an expected growth of 6% in 2023, and we are sure we'll be able to afford the 21.7 billion and remain sustainable in the medium term. And we do believe that will also create some impact for that momentum. As I conclude, I would like to bring to your attention that the government has rolled out framework of productivity and performance to support to support this rewarding the reward structure. So when we reward productivity and performance, the public sector is aiming to increasing its efficiency. And for us, that is very, very important because service delivery, especially under the e-citizen, is very, very important because it's going to improve public sector delivery, how public sector delivers its service and how efficient it will be. We are moving into e-citizen just to improve the service and also reduce the person-to-person contact when you are looking for services in government. You don't have to travel, you don't have to incur cost. You can enter into the e-citizen platform using your phone. At the comfort of your house or office, you can transact or you can receive service by government. That is why we are supporting it. And that is how we are going to improve service. And that is how we are going to make things work. Once this improves, we do believe that at the institutional and individual levels, we will see the significant improvement in this area of public service. That seamless service delivery is going to be important even for tax payment. The e-citizen provides even tax payment platforms. You don't have to. Many years ago, we used to travel to the KRA, queue there, get in to pay your taxes, isn't it? And then sometimes you would be carrying a banker's check. They could not recognize you. You have to go to the bank, get a banker's check. Suppose the amount you wanted to pay changes, then you go back, okay? So you can imagine those years are gone. We're talking about a totally new decade of efficiency. So in a sense, we can take advantage of that and we can make sure that we build our economy because that kind of efficiency, it lowers transactions cost at the individual level, at the institutional level, and even at government level. Now, once you lower transactions cost, especially even for firms and individuals, then you are enhancing your profitability. It's a very, very beautiful channel through which we can summarize. But I also, before I leave, because we mentioned tax effort, GDP, I've just come back and the PS mentioned that now this is my 10th month in a very, very difficult environment because of economic recovery. We're trying to push economic recovery. But just to give you a glimpse of what I said, during President Kibaki's time, and that is the last time I was in government, because I stayed a bit, tax to GDP was 22%. I still recall that I went to the East African community and with other governors we said we were setting up convergence criteria for all the East African economies. And we pushed that to 25%. At 22%, we were meeting 96% of our total recurrent and development expenditure. And we are only left with about between 96 and 98%. And we are only left by about 2 to 4% for aid, domestic borrowing, appropriations in aid, and even external borrowing. I've come back and I started by looking at the data. We had dropped that to 13.7%. Just imagine that structure that moves from 22% of GDP to 13.7% of GDP is major shift, isn't it? So that's why when we talk about affordability, it comes from there. We have worked on that space, and we are now, in this fiscal year, we are at 15.8%, isn't it? But when we talk about 15.8%, SRC Megij, you said it's 7.4% of GDP yourselves. You're actually taking slightly over half of it to go to wages, isn't it? So you can start drawing the picture that we are at 15.8% of the revenue, tax revenue to GDP. That 15.5% wages, that is the remuneration to the public sector, is taking 7.4%. So you can imagine, you are only left with the balance for the other sectors to grow the economy, investment and everything. So you can see the gravity of it. Why is it that we need to grow the economy? Because we need to grow that ratio. So you also understand that there is no other way the government can get revenues except through taxation. But taxation will become much better because the tax revenue increases with economic activity, that is with the growth of the economy. Whenever you see a growth trajectory that is going to work, and remember I said the structure, quality and of growth is very, very important, then you will see what is really happening. So I like giving those pictures, those broad pictures, just to show exactly how things are going. We are happy that we are moving back. We have agreed with our multilateral partners that we are going to grow to 19% by 2025. So we really have to move in that direction because that's the only way we can have some positive discussions with SRC. That is why we cannot run away from SRC when they bring their proposals. But if we don't do that, we continue telling SRC, please freeze. We see whether next year is going to be better, isn't it? Please freeze. Next year will be better. I know the rest of the people who are supposed to receive these increases, working for public sector, will be complaining because of the erosion of cost of living. We are working on that side too. In fact, when you look at what is happening, when we came into government, the inflation rate was about 9.3%. It was actually even higher, much the data I can remember. And we have seen now, the month of July, inflation has declined to 7.3. It is back to the range of between 2.5% and 7.5%. We are going to work within that range, and we will know that it can work because the raft of measures that have been put in place are going to help us to get there. So we do believe that the important message I want to get to you is that everything is dependent on how we grow the cake. How we grow the economy and how we grow the tax base is going to be important for us because it gives us flexibility. And what PS Dr. Kipto said, once we have fiscal space, then we can actually signal fiscal consolidation, which we have done in the few months that we have been in government. We have moved away from 6.2% of fiscal deficit to a target we agreed with the IMF at 5.8, but we delivered 5.7. In this fiscal year, we are targeting 4.4. We are creating that fiscal space. It is moving on to give us the fiscal consolidation that we desired, and also we are signaling to the rest of the world that our debt, external debt and internal debt situation, let's say public debt, is going to be sustainable. And that is why we have even moved boldly to say we need also a debt anchor that gives us a policy space to work on. That you people, especially the media, you'll be looking at the data and telling us, hey guys, you are outside the range, or you guys, I can see you are doing well. We don't want guesswork, so that a policy range is very strong commitment to the policy directive that we are going to. We can talk more, but the most important thing is to understand that everything has a basis and a platform for discussion, and today we wanted to show that once we are agreeing with what SRC proposals has come through, once we have agreed in terms of what we need to do, once we agree on the speed of adjustment given the current constraints, we live with that, and we also give ourselves commitment saying how we can do better is ABCD. I was in a session yesterday and some people were talking and saying, when you have Madamano, businesses close. During the COVID, when there was lockdown, I argued that there are people who, if they don't wake up and go to work, there's no food on the table, isn't it? That population is still there, isn't it? So you can imagine how we fought lockdown, but how did we fight lockdown? Government provided transfers because it is for a short time to contain the spread of the disease. So essentially, then let us not bring artificial lockdowns, okay? Because somebody will go hungry. A border rider cannot go to town because the border can be burned. Don't think it's magic. No, it's not. This is the reality. That dent you have to pay. The border will have to pay the loan to whoever has financed it, isn't it? So that day he is zero or negative because he needed to pay but didn't bring. So he has to work extra weeks or months to even recover that. So these are realities. I don't know why most people don't even write about these realities, because I don't know. I live in the real world myself, and I always try to inculcate that idea that I live in the real world. And any analysis that I do or propose is actually getting from the reality and trying to see how can we do better. I've talked for weeks and months with my dear sister here, and at times we were almost going to fight it out, but we realized all of us are facing one common denominator, the reality, isn't it? And we did agree. That's why when we come here and we are smiling, don't think there were smiles before. The smiles came to say, you have understood the reality. We are all looking at one cow. We can have different adjectives, but it's the same cow, isn't it? If it cannot produce adequate milk, we know what we should do. Feed it properly. And that's what we are going to do. That's the commitment we are going to deliver. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Members on the high table, right now we want to go to the final phase of this press briefing. Q&A, question and answers. So members of the Fourth Estate, this is the opportunity. You've heard from the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, you've heard from the National Treasury, you've heard figures being banded over to you, and you want to ask questions. This is your opportunity. So this is how we're going to do it. We will have a set of, we'll try to do this at maximum 3 rounds. Keep your questions very brief so that we can have an opportunity for everybody to ask at least a question. So first 3, please introduce your name, introduce yourself, your name, and your institution or the media house that you represent, and then you go straight to the question. Keep it very, very brief. They will take notes, then they will, at the response point, chair or representative, and also from the National Treasury, they'll come to this podium and they'll respond to your questions. We'll try to do this maximum 3 rounds. Anyone with the first question, let's proceed. Roving microphone, there's a roving microphone. You already have a microphone, go ahead.
My name is Tom Taigoin from Citizen TV, and I have 2 questions, one to SRC and one to the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary. SRC Chair, you have mentioned that you are carrying out your constitutional duty of doing the salary review, but the President and his deputy have said they do not want a salary review. One, will they be subject to this review? Could you kindly share the figures of what they will be getting? And if not, can you apply the law selectively in a way that the president and the deputy can be exempt? I know you've talked about there are those that are 50% percentile, there are those that are 85. Do they fall in the category of maybe those that do not need a salary increase or review? And the question to the National Treasury, if this salary review is done for the state and public officers, there are new taxation measures that are also taking effect and some being backdated back to the 1st of July. With this salary review, will they be subject to taxation in terms of if it's housing levy or whatever tax measures are taking effect in the Finance Act 2023? Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. I hear right in the middle.
Good morning, my name is Peter Mburu from Daily Nation. Also two questions, one to SRC and another to the Treasury CS. On SRC, I just want to understand the jargon behind percentile. So when you say that in teaching it's 36% percentile, and you're targeting 50. So in terms of a figure, what are you looking at? Is it a salary of moving from what to what? From the Treasury, I know one of the ways you've been targeting to raise revenue this particular year is through privatization, and the President had issued, I think, a one-year term period to list about 10 state corporations or to privatize them. What is the progress of this? Thank you.
Next. Any other question? Or on this side?
My name is Ivasun Maina from KBC. And, I have two questions. And even before I ask this one, I would like to get a clarity from the chairperson, as I've said in the speech, on the issues of salaries for state officers. This is not coming quite clear. At the time, when we had this kind of a presser, you had indicated that all the state officers, civil servants will be affected and they will get an increase in that matter. But I would like you to state categorically whether state officers are going to get an increase or not. And then question number two, in a briefing with the editors, it was a breakfast meeting, you indicated that state corporation salaries will be reviewed in 2035, June 2035. But it's now clear that you have some 700 million shillings for public officers. I'd like you to state which state corporations and agencies, in that matter, will be affected in this situation. And then finally, are you also planning to review commuter allowances? Because we understand that VAT on fuel has increased. Thank you.
Sure, do we take more? Sure. We can take more. Okay, let's take more. They are taking notes. I see a question right there at the back. My roving mic.
Good morning. Kevin Miller at the Business Day. Two questions come to SRC with regards to the backdating of the salary reviews for July. Do you have a quantum of the size of the arrears that would be for the month of July? Then to the National Treasury, glad you could come through. So I had a question. I think Chris Daktari mentioned about how you're handling pending bills. There was securitization done for some of the pending bills to oil marketers when they were asked to subscribe to a bond. If you tell us the outcome of that process, that would be appreciated.
Maybe one last question, and then we will have the high panel respond. And right, is there? Did I see your hand up? No? Oh, okay, Chair.
Right, the first question is about from Chemtaigo in. You asked about the deputy president. Are they getting a review? Are they exempt? The answer is that yes, we have reviewed for all state officers. I want to combine with another question that says, can we be very specific on state officers? You will see that there is a review for state officers, and they have already been gazetted, Tony, I believe. So you can actually access and see the specifics. So there is a review for state officers as well. The president and the deputy president, their salaries have been retained from where they were previously. The second question is, what do we mean by 50th percentile? I want to just use an illustration. If you've got 5 organizations, I'm using 5, and one organization pays a certain salary, probably 50,000, another one 60, another one 70, another one 80, another one 100. So we take the company in the middle. That's 50th. So it's not a median, because median would mean you take the total amount and calculate a statistical median. But percentiles means you take the position in the market. So we are at a position of 50th percentile. It's the middle position. So you then pick the pay that is that falls into that position, which is the 50th percentile. State corporations, most of them will be frozen because they are at an average of 89th percentile. But remember, what we have given you is an average. It doesn't mean they are all at 89th. Indeed, there are state corporations that are below 50th. So the amount that you saw there that we shared earlier means that for state corporations that are really way below, then there will also be a review on a case-by-case basis. Can we specify at this point which ones we can share later if we need to, but actually that's the message, that for those that are way below, there will be a review. Commuter allowance, is this being reviewed? No. The reason is a question about affordability. Yes, we do acknowledge that cost of living will impact all elements of remuneration, including commuter. However, we've been taken through the economic realities by the CS. So going by the realities on the ground, we cannot afford to make that review. Then the issue about backdating to 1st July, what does that cost? So if you take that figure as an annual figure, you can divide, get your monthly, then you can see what it means to backdate. So it is, yes, it is being backdated to 1st July because that is the effective date. And that is it for SRC.
Thank you very much for the questions that came up, and thank you very much. Some of them are interesting. And I start with, is it Chemtai? Yes, yes. And you talked about the finance bill. Of course, when a matter is in court, we don't go discussing. But the most important thing is to understand what is the finance bill. Because this year is the first time, and that is even what the president said when we were at Sagana State Road. For the first time, we had more debate on the finance bill. But I would like you as media to go out there and tell Kenyans what is the finance bill. First, it contains policies and measures that are going to be implemented in the fiscal year. Those policies and measures, and even reforms proposed, sometimes will require revenues. And the totality of then the final point is that it arranges how government expenditures and investments in the period are going to be financed. So in a sense, everybody looks at the taxes but forgets that there was an arrangement of revenues and expenditure patterns, because this is where fiscal policy works. Everybody now focuses on taxes that were raised, but there were taxes that were scrapped, levies that were scrapped, taxes that were lowered, isn't it? In the same finance bill. That's why I found I wouldn't want to comment. I found even my church saying that we should withdraw. What about? I mean, that is extreme. What about those people who are waiting for the levies and taxes that were lowered or levies that were scrapped? But the bottom line, let's come back. What is the reality? Once we move out of court, the Finance Act is a law, and it governs you for the fiscal year from 1st of July to 30th of June, isn't it? So everything is inclusive, and everything must be done within that period. But we want to support that because we want to support the finance bill because everybody participates. This year we had the most participation. I don't know how many sessions we went in public participation. So in a sense, what we actually portrayed there was actually what the public wanted us to put in. The second thing is privatization. Thank you for that question. The privatization bill is in Parliament, and still we are still waiting for that to pass through. We did make sure that the propositions are clear, that we can have diverse ways of privatization. But what is privatization all about? It cannot increase your, when you sell your assets, do you increase your wealth or you deplete your wealth, isn't it? It's like reorganizing your assets. So you cannot say you're going to grow the GDP because of privatization. Let's wake up a little bit. Let's wake up and understand things. But for us, as a national policy, we are trying to reorganize and create more efficiency. And that is why we would like to privatize, so that government is not doing, the role of government is not to do business. So we want to leave the business to be done by the private sector. And for us, we safeguard. That's why the privatization bill is going to come and help us in doing that. But let's not have that idea that you're going to grow the GDP directly by privatization or increase income. No. What we want is to make sure that those state-owned enterprises perform the best, and that is why we should have diverse ways of privatizing. So over the years to come, the growth trajectory will change just because most of those state-owned enterprises that have not been performing, once they are privatized, they move into their core business and they are going to push the economy in a different way. That's where the benefits will come, and those benefits will be sustainable. Somebody talked about VAT on fuel collection. I think again it's part of but I think if you go back to the budget statement, it was very clear. We are realigning, because you cannot have some goods with VAT at 8%, and those people who are claiming cost, they are claiming at 18%, they are always on positive tax credit, and the rest of the people are taxed at 16%, isn't it? We have to realign. This is a realignment. But because of interpretation, once the tax bill has been cleared, we can have more discussions. We posted numbers. If you go into the website for the National Treasury, read the statement, we devoted much time to explain that. And I'm very surprised that our media people did not even pick it up. And we spent so much pen and paper to make sure that the message is very clear. But anyway, we'll talk about that, because if we had the flexibility with my peers, we would have brought it out. But we have to wait until the court clears and tells us what to do. Somebody raised an issue on VAT. Yeah? Somebody raised the issue of pending bills. First of all, we are going to make sure that we advertise the committee. The cabinet has approved that we can now have a committee for pending bills. That clearance by the cabinet is very, very important for us, because we want to make sure that we come to a conclusion that there should be no pending bills in the future. The previous reviews, especially starting during President Kibaki's time, there was reviewed and we thought we got into a finality. And then we realized that actually, until they are verified, and that's what our law says, there's no way we can, but we want to stop this. But let me say, the numbers we have some numbers for the pending bill, which you focus on the fuel one. When this government took over, the subsidy accumulation was about 83 billion. And we struggled to pay, and we stopped the subsidy because, as His Excellency the President said, there's nowhere you can subsidize consumption. Because we don't know when you can be satisfied, isn't it? When I was teaching economic theory, when we want to model consumption behavior, the first thing is to make an assumption that you're not satiated, isn't it? That is, there is no satiation. That is, you're not oversaturated with consumption, isn't it? So you can get more. More is preferred to less, isn't it? So you can imagine if you're subsidizing consumption and everybody wants a higher consumption level, isn't it? It cannot work. And secondary, it's not a production process. When you subsidize input, you know you expect production at the end of the seasonal cycle. So by the time that decision was made, we had 83 billion, and we continued to help reduce it. We even promised by February, March, we would have done it. We still found ourselves not, until we got to a point where resources were not there and we needed to do something. We had 43 billion arrears. And so we had to make a decision. And after discussions, we decided that actually we can securitize half of it in that fiscal year and half of it in this fiscal year. Then it becomes an investment for them, isn't it? And they will be now looking at the investment, and we clean up the books. There are diverse ways of doing things, and that was very, very innovative. And obviously everybody has been very happy, even in the private sector. But I have seen some comments in the media, and I say, my friends, I think you should invite us to explain, rather than make comments that intolerably true. And I say intolerably true because my work and my life has been to try and eradicate any form of ignorance. So you should clear with us, because you write something that somebody does not look at it and say, I will never read that paper again, or I will never read that article. So some of them were intolerably not true, but the bottom line is that it is innovative. It has solved the problem. We are going to use the same technology when we are dealing with pending bills, but the verifiable ones, isn't it? Because just like we said, you cannot always have the resources that you need at the time you need them. We have to grow the economy. But for us to grow the economy, even the pending bill is a drag, isn't it? Those people who are old, and even us who have the debt, we feel the drag. So we have to solve it, and that's why we need to solve it and then close that chapter and move on. I'm sure I've covered everything. Thank you very much, and good morning.
I hope we are happy with that. It doesn't look like there's a second round, which is a good thing. It means the media has understood. That brings this presser to an end. So what I can already say is that the SRC press release is available. So if the registration desk, you feel free to grab a hard print